and welcome back to the Dreamcast. I am your host, Denise Walsh. I combine science, scripture, and stories that will inspire you to dive deep, break through your own personal glass ceiling, and design a life of your dreams. All right, big welcome back to the Dreamcast. So in this episode, I am really excited to dive in to the transformational story for one of my good friends. He has been listening to the podcast since its beginning. I've actually known him years prior. He was my RA in college, and I knew him through working in our business, and I have known his love for people and his love for health and wellness. And when I started the Dreamcast, him knowing me and knowing the purpose and the vision for the Dreamcast, he said, I want you to I want to be interviewed. I want to share my story. And I said, okay, well, what do you want to talk about? And we scheduled a coffee date to just sit down and really dive into the transformation that he's experienced over the past decade, even beyond his love of people, beyond his love of health and wellness. I got to hear really some divine interventions that happened in his life and how he has started the healing process, has healed on lots of different levels himself. And now he's come to a place where he is ready and excited to share his story with others. As you know, when you go through your own transformation, there's a lot of times this calling to share that because you know that somebody is back where you used to be. And so honestly, that coffee date could have been recorded. I was so moved and touched by his story, and I know that you will be too. So without further ado, I would love to introduce Carlos Kulas-Dominguez to the Dreamcast.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Denise, and for having me on here and for allowing me to just share my story, which I really pray that God just speaks through my experiences and shares some love and hope. And like you said, I've been listening to your Dreamcast and I love the content and where you're going with it and just the way you're bringing people along for the journey that you've been on through their stories.
Awesome. Well, just so if you guys hear noise in the background, my handyman is outside mowing the lawn and he's just right now at my office window. And I thought, is there a way that I can stop him right now? But no, we have 6.5 acres and it needs to be mowed. So just so you know, if you hear that in the background, that's just part of life and the beauty of working from home. So Carlos, let's jump right into your story. I know the transition point is a rollover car accident. And that, I mean, honestly, that for you was your wake up call. That was the beginning of making a change. But I want our listeners to really get to know you before the car accident, and we'll spend a lot of time talking about that, what you experienced in the healing after. So tell us a bit about what life was like before that rock bottom moment.
Sure. I think before that moment where the transitions started happening for me, I think I had one of those mentalities that I was larger than life. And I was on this path where I just thought I was large and in charge. And I was on the path that I have always saw myself. Just kind of going back in a little bit about me, I grew up in inner city Detroit in a neighborhood that was a little challenging. There was violence, there was gangs, there were drugs, there was all kinds of life happening throughout that experience. And in that process, I just want to throw that out there because it's really important when we get to the rollover car accident. I am also a gay out man, and growing up in that neighborhood, I didn't realize the impact that it was having on my identity and who I was. So my big purpose before all this was I'm just getting out of Detroit. I'm going to do something bigger and better. I am going to do it the way that I know best. And for me, that was, by being smart and by going to college, which led me to Grand Valley. And so before that accident, I really thought I had it all together. I had studied abroad. I come from a really great family. I've set goals and I've met them, whether it was getting to college, getting out of Detroit, traveling abroad, coming out of the closet. There's just so many things. I thought, okay, I'm doing this. This is happening, and there's nothing wrong with me. But little did I know that in the finer layers of the story I was creating of who I was, there was a lot of brokenness, and there was a lot of hurt and some healing that needed to happen. And I just thought it was gonna, if I ignored it and just kept living the way I was living, I'm gonna be fine.
So you honestly were at the top of your mountain at that time, because you did get out of Detroit. You did go to college. You did succeed, quote unquote, and you met the goals that you hit. And so this larger than life attitude, it kind of took you into some cultures that ended up not really benefiting you down the road. So when you say larger than life, what kind of things were you doing that you look back now and think that might not have been the best place for me to be?
Great question. I think living in a world and not really recognizing where I came from, meaning that larger than life for me meant that I had a lot of personality. I was doing another interview with a friend, and that was what she explained. She said, what I remembered about you during that time, which was before the car accident, was that I was leading the charge. I was out there with this big personality, whether it was being charming, whether it was leading big movements within at Grand Valley, even just in my own personal goals of giving back and volunteering through different opportunities with homeless or LGBT centers. I just thought, that's what I'm going to do. So what do I have to work on for myself? This is going to be about other people, about me serving other people. And so that was my larger than life attitude that I had. And again, I now know that it was a way of just really running and hiding from the things that I needed to unpack.
Okay, so your eyes were focused outward, meaning you were serving, you were doing good things, but yet there was something restless going on inside. So tell us a little bit about the car accident and that rock bottom moment.
Yeah, so I think that it's important to share that in that larger than life mentality, I think you live that one life, but then when you have all these dark places inside of you, there's a secret life. And that secret life for me was definitely, people would see one thing, but at night or on a weekend, I joined a fraternity. So I think that's important. I was a part of a fraternity. So that was one of those escapes for me, because we would get together and you're partying and drinking lets you just kind of be another person. And I never thought about that as being a problem. And that's going to become important when I get deeper into the story. But I would go clubbing. I became a bartender. I did all these things that let me kind of just live in a world that wasn't really aligned with where I needed to be. So I remember at the time of the car accident, like I said, I had all these accomplishments that I could, just check off and think, yeah, this is great. But I can go out and do what I want. And so the car accident specifically happened during a time where I was feeling pretty lost when I think back now. Of course, then I didn't think so, because I had a great job, good income, great family, all those things. But the part that I wasn't dealing with was my my secret demons, which led to recovery. And that's my car accident. I'm actually having a hard time sharing this, Denise. Mm-hmm. So ask your question again, please.
Yep, no problem. Well, and I think that there's a reason why I never knew this story before we talked at our coffee date. Like, you haven't really been loud about this because it's not easy to talk about yet. There's part of you that's really ready. And I know that because you wouldn't have asked me to share this story several times if there wasn't a part of you that said, this is part of the next step for my healing. So the car accident, you had a weekend out. And as you said, you had this like success identity, but yet on the weekends or at night, it was clubbing, it was partying, it was staying out late, it was doing all the things that probably somebody who thinks they're invincible does. You're out late, you're clubbing the night away, living life. But then you got in the car and were driving home the next morning. but you didn't make it home.
No. And you're absolutely right. I thought I was invincible, and I had done that so many times where I would go out and just party all night, drinking, just having fun, being with people, the things that I normally do. The person that you know me now is, being social. And this particular night, I had actually worked a solid day of at the bar. And then I drove out to another club after work and spent the entire evening just hanging out with friends, meeting new people. And it was 7 a.m. on Labor Day morning. And this was in 2004. And I remember thinking, oh, it's time to go home. I feel fine. I hop in my car. I've done this 100 times before. And even knowing that maybe I hadn't been drunk at the time, because I didn't feel that, but I knew that I was tired. And I've driven tired many times. And I think, well, I'll just pull over. Well, this was one of those moments where I thought, no, I'm making it home. And I should add that I was giving a friend a ride home because he had been left at the club that night too. And so driving back at 7 a.m, and it was a rainy Labor Day morning, I had fallen asleep at the wheel. And I remember waking up and overcompensating I hit a barrel on the left side of the road and overcompensated because it startled me. And that just changed the trajectory of my life. I went up the side of the freeway and the car ended up going upright. We just missed the beam of an overpass. So we went through that little small space of an overpass, if you can picture that. And car was upright, landed on its side, and we ended up upside down, hanging. Thank God the seatbelt was on for me. And thank God I had closed the sunroof because my friend did not have his seatbelt on. And normally I would drive with my sunroof. So there's just all these things. In that moment, things slow down and you just can remember vividly, at least your version of what the vividly was. And we were upside down on the other side of the overpass. And I remember the first thing was just making sure that he was okay. I'm responsible for this person in my car. And then just making sure that we're still breathing. And we're upside down. And the one thing I do remember so clearly, though, is praying. I just went into this instant state of prayer, just asking God to just let me live through this. Please give me a chance to do right. Give me a chance to, unpack whatever it is that's put me in this position. And then I remember asking very, very specifically, let me see my niece one more time. Because at that time, I had one niece, and now I have 10 nieces and nephews. But as we're upside down and my friend is just like laying on the roof, like I said, the sunroof was closed. Had that not been closed, I don't want to even imagine what could have happened. And then there's a man that comes and breaks the windows to get us out because there was no way we were going to get out. And I remember getting out of the car, crawling out and talking to the man, and he's just asking, do you even know what happened? And I'm like, yeah, this is what happened. And he said, well, yeah, that's about right. But do you realize how you should be dead? Like, I remember him saying, you should be dead, but you missed that beam probably by inches because he witnessed the entire thing. And all I could respond to him was, where are the kids that were there? And he's like, what are you talking about? And I remember hanging upside down, seeing two little children. It was a boy and a girl, probably about 6, 7, that age group. And I mean, they had brown hair. I remember them just standing there, like right next to each other. And I asked him several times, but where are the kids? Are the kids okay? Are the kids okay? And all he could tell me was, I think that you're imagining those things. I'm like, no, there were 2 kids. And that's when just this peace came over me. In that moment, you're just in shock anyway. But I remember this calming feeling of peace because I just thought, those are just my angels. Those were 2 angels that were sent to protect both of us in that car that morning. And to this day, I won't forget those faces. I don't remember what that man's face looks like, but I remember what those 2 kids' faces look like. And then the rest of the night, the cops come and you get taken away, and we can get into that more, but that was that moment.
So that was a moment where you knew what was your faith like before this moment?
I've always considered myself to be very spiritual. I did go to church here and there. I knew that I was raised Catholic, and I went to a Catholic school for part of my schooling. So that was just a piece of who I was, but I never understood what my relationship with God was. And that has always been a struggle for me up until that point, because I didn't feel like I had a place where I belonged, being a gay male and trying to figure out all of those layers of identity, and growing up in the neighborhood that I did, like I mentioned, in a family that, everybody is got a husband or wife and their kids. Like, I wanted to be like everybody else. So I didn't think that I had a real place with God at that time. But he quickly opened a door during that experience.
Mm. So, even throughout that, you thought about God, but, and you had, experiences or, times at church, but it was this moment, seeing those two little kids, where that peace came over you, and it seems like your eyes and heart were open, knowing that God was exactly there taking care of you.
Yeah, I think it wouldn't. I wasn't prepared for the amount I was going to learn about how much God had been present for many other moments.
Wow.
Prior to that, because like I said, I was larger than life. That's just one example. That's just the big story. That was the turning point. But there were so many other stories of, and once we, when I get into the addiction piece, that my addiction led me to do so many things that I know now that God was there watching over me and sparing my life in so many ways.
Wow. Okay. So your heart and eyes are open. There's just like peace. There's this, something changes, your perspective shifts during this rock bottom moment. But then you go, I don't know, do you go to the hospital? Do you go to jail? Like, what happens next?
Yeah. So for me, they gave me the option to go to the hospital, but in my mind, that's really an interesting question, because I remember thinking in that moment, I don't deserve to go to the hospital. Like, I just created this situation, and God just saved my life. And I had one little scratch and I felt fine. I thought to myself, I don't really deserve to go to the hospital. Like, just take me to jail, And I remember signing away and saying, yeah, I'm not going to go to the hospital. Make sure that I was safe and healthy. Just take me to jail, get this and put me where I belong, so to say. And it is a very humbling experience being handcuffed and put into the back of a car. It was state troopers. And I remember just holding it together the best that I can. And one of those officers said, "It's okay. We all make mistakes." And I just lost it in the back of their car. I was sobbing and praying and lost and scared. Every feeling you can imagine. And then, but the two most overwhelming feelings that you get in an experience like that is and this is if you're open to it. Because I met, since my time after this and going to recovery and 12 steps and so many different meetings, that many people don't learn and they're not open to it. But me, I was humbled and I felt so much humility. And then they take you to that jailhouse and they're booking you and asking questions, and that's when they make you breathe and find out, where exactly, just the whole thing. And I just remember looking around in that jailhouse, thinking to myself, wow, do I really belong here? Like, how did I get myself here? Like, all those questions that you've been avoiding, living that larger than life lifestyle, you don't ask any of those questions. And then they throw you into a holding cell with, there are probably at least 40 other men in this holding cell. And there's nothing attractive about it. It's one toilet, completely open, smelly, dirty. Every form of person is in that room. And all I'm thinking is, how am I going to survive this?
Wow. I love that in the midst of you, number one, feeling grateful for being spared, feeling God with you for maybe one of the most clearest times, that the police officer offered you grace and just said, we all make mistakes. I can imagine that at that, your guard is down. I would be bawling my eyes out too. So you're in the holding cell with 40 other guys. And this is really when you say, okay, is this the life that I want? What do I want? Like, you really start to question what brought you here. Did you have any aha moments besides that throughout the holding cell and then being booked or then released?
I think my first aha moment in that holding cell was, what do I need to do differently? What is it that I need to do to make a different choice? There's a reason that I got here, and I still didn't even know why that I was there. I knew for the practical reasons how I got there, but I didn't realize the amount of layers that were beneath that of what led me to that place. So that was, I just knew it was going to be a long process. So that was an aha moment for me. Like, okay, what does this mean? And where do I go next? And how am I going to figure it out? And I think the other aha moment to me was I wasn't larger than life, and I was nowhere near in charge of driving that vehicle, literally and, spiritually in any way. Like, I needed to let go. And that was what that happened. That was a huge, just everything, all those curtains pull back, and you realize, all right, I need to just let this process happen and not try to control it. Because right away you're thinking, how am I going to get out of this? How am I going to get out of this? And that's just not how it works.
Yeah. Now, Al, I'm just so curious. Did you talk to anybody in there? Like, what do you guys do? What do you just sit on the floor? Like, how does it work?
Absolutely. I know I can only speak for me, because some people look very comfortable there. So I walked in freaking out, because you walk into this jailhouse, and in this particular jailhouse, like their holding cells are all glass. So everybody's like, can see you. And all I remember thinking is, please don't put me in that one. Please don't put me in that one. Because those men were just staring you down, and it was scary. So I remember when they put me in the one, and I remember some people still being at the glass, but it wasn't the other ones that looked scary, but it looked extremely, I was scared to go in there. So I remember them putting me in there, and I scouted, where am I going to find my spot to sit? And I was looking at each person in there, everything from, do they smell? Do they look like they're going to hurt me? Are they going to try to engage with me? Are they going to, all those things they're going through your head. And I just found the one person that I just looked like would like me. That's what you're looking for. Who in here is like me? And you don't even know their story. And that's what I did. I remember finding a little corner by, I don't remember his name, but he about the same age. I sat over there. He was passed out at the time, I believe. And I just sat in the corner. And as I got settled and just feeling a little bit more like, well, this is just where I'm at, and I'm not going anywhere, because they don't let you call anybody. Like, I didn't have that option at that time. And so this is a little self-serving, but I remember thanking God at that moment too, that they take everything from you. They take your socks, your shoes, belts. You have nothing except for the clothes that you are wearing. And they would even take off the layers if you had more than one layer. And I did have that on, and they, for some reason, did not take away my shirt, because I had another t-shirt underneath. And I remember taking that shirt off and just covering my face with it for the next 24 hours, because I think I was there for at least 24 hours. And I did talk to the guy next to me. Finally, he woke up, and that was just one of those moments too, where it's like, you know what, even in that space, you need a friend, and he was my friend for that time. So.
All right. And you're the guy that was in the car with you, he went to the hospital. Is he okay? I just want to make sure that we clean that up before we move on. Okay.
No, for sure. He, another humbling experience. They leave whoever is with you there. Like, they're on their own. So they left him on the side of the road. He was safe, no injuries, nothing was wrong with him. But I can say though, it is a heart-wrenching experience, because you feel so responsible. I remember being taken away, and there was nothing I could do for him. So Yeah, they left him there, and it wasn't my problem and it wasn't their problem. So I had to wait until I was home and able to reach out and make sure that he even made it home safely.
Okay. Okay. So you're booked, you're in jail, and now you're sentenced to probation and all of the things that happen. Tell me what what did the court say was mandated
Absolutely.
for you for recovery?
Yeah. So if before we even get to the court, I think it's important, just coming out and carrying that weight of who are you going to call for help? Like you feel helpless and just not even prepared. So I remember getting the court date set. Actually, I remember having to make that call to my parents first, and letting them know, hey, this happened. And I didn't even let my mom know for a couple of days because I knew what that would do to her. And my grandparents found out first and came. And I remember them rolling up in front of the house and coming outside to greet them. And again, just losing everything. I just lost it. I was bawling and crying, and they're there to comfort. And thank God I had such amazing family in general, but they came. But what I wasn't prepared for is they wanted to see the car, and I hadn't seen the car since, the accident. And they drove me to go and see this car and get pictures, and because they wanted to see what happened. And again, that was just one of those second moments where you're like, God, thank you. Thank you for sending my grandparents, and thank you for saving my life, that I could even take them to show this, because it hurt them, and they were there for a few days to just kind of be there to comfort me and to walk me through the process and to not judge. And they had always been that way. But then it came to the time to let my mom know, and she couldn't even come. She still doesn't know what that car looks like. It's one thing she's chosen to not ever have to see or witness. But that led to court. So my grandparents came for court. My dad came for court. My mom still wasn't ready. We hired an attorney because it was very much advised to get an attorney. And thank God I did. They were, it's it's kind of like that moment I already described to you when they give you the choice to go to the hospital or go straight to the jail. I'm thinking, well, I don't deserve an attorney. I did this, and I've always been one of those people, like, I did it. Let me, get my punishment. But I did what I was told, and they got an attorney, and they were able to drop the charges down. At first it was a driving under the influence, and then it changed to a DWI. So it was driving while intoxicated or something less. But it didn't mean that they weren't going to throw everything at you. I remember sitting there, and you feel like, you are, and I think you're supposed to if you're in the right space, but you feel like a total criminal. The judge asks every question you can imagine about the night and what led to it. And it's a cattle call. So everybody's there to listen to your story, and another humbling experience. But he gave me everything. I had to go to AA meetings. I had to go to seek a therapist. I had a probation officer that I had to meet with. I believe it was monthly, or I had to meet with him regularly. I lost my license for at least 2 years. I wasn't allowed to drive for that first part of it. So everything changes. They took away all of that, not to mention the costs that are, so everything that he could do, he did. I was required to get letters of reference if I wanted to get off probation from, to speak to my character. And that was pretty much everything that he gave me. So
tell me about your first meeting at AA. And so it's interesting because at this point, you were humbled. You were like, okay, like apparently I have something to learn. I don't want to be in this situation again. But you didn't necessarily recognize yourself as being addicted or having a problem. It was just happened this way. So there's a bit of, I'm interested to see the process where you start to internalize it a little bit, because I think most people who do go to AA aren't quite sure that they really have a problem yet. And so it seems like you were in that space too.
Absolutely. I was 100% in that space. I figured, I made a mistake. I'm going to pay for it. Let's get this over with. And, I'm going to do what's right. And like I had mentioned, God showed up for the accident. I did not realize that God wasn't done. So, got a therapist, was working with a therapist. And then the AA meetings, the sentence was specifically, I think I had to go to 90 meetings in 60 days. I mean, it's something like ridiculous. And now I know why.
And you don't have a car.
And you don't have a car.
Right.
Granted, they do make exceptions that you can, I had it restricted for a little bit.
Okay,
so that I was
you
able
could drive to the meetings.
But that wasn't right away.
Okay.
So at first I was, taking the bus, right? I learned public transportation very well during this entire process. Even from going to visit. I mean, I couldn't go, I should add too, I wasn't allowed to go to any functions that had alcohol. Couldn't go to family functions that if there were going to be alcohol. I mean, they were very specific with what I could and could not do. And as you said, I mean, I've always been one of those people, like I only usually need to learn something once. And I tend to be a rule follower, even though it's kind of ironic because I was driving. And that's the rule, not to drive while you're drinking, right? So, but the AA part, I was totally, and I think most people in that situation I was very bitter and not happy that I had to go, because in my mind, I'm asking myself, well, why do I have to do that? I don't drink every day. I don't go and party every day. I'm not in this situation. I made the wrong choice that one time, but I'm a rule follower. So I went to my very first AA meeting. It was at the Alano Club over on in our area here off of College. It's like the biggest one in Grand Rapids that I'm aware of. It's got years of sobriety. It's a large group. I think there were probably close to 50 to 60 people at this first meeting. But I remember walking into that first meeting, and I think that was more scary than going to the jailhouse. Because you don't know what you're walking into, and the people there looked extremely rough. I mean, I just looking for a seat was nerve-wracking, and not knowing what to expect from this meeting was nerve-wracking. I just knew that I had to be there. And that day was, again, one of those moments when God showed up. It was he was preparing me to be in that place. I went to that meeting and I heard stories of pain. I heard stories of anger. I heard stories of hopelessness. I mean, there were so many stories, because when you go to your first meeting, for those people who might not have ever been to a 12-step, they call it the first step meeting. So everybody's sharing their story of how they got there and why they're there. And just hearing these stories, I just thought, wow, I can see myself in that person. I can't see myself in this person. I remember thinking to myself, oh, I don't need to learn the hard way, because that person has been here like sent back here 4 times and they've killed 3 people, like the stories were crazy in my mind to process, but it didn't change the fact that I sat there so closed. I sat there so unwilling to wanting to share. I knew I wasn't going to share because they give you the option. And I said, I'm here because I have to, and I'm not like any of you, so I'm going to sit through this meeting and I'm going to get through it. And who knows if I'm coming back. And that was the first meeting. And luckily I had an amazing probation officer who was willing to give me a list of so many other meetings to check out. And that's what I started doing. After that first meeting, I don't believe I ever went back to that place, because I couldn't identify. I needed to, somebody told me to find a meeting where you can relate and that you're going to feel somewhat at home. Which now I understand what that meant, because you might feel comfortable, you might find people you relate to, but you don't feel at home because it's all about the work that you have to do.
So tell me about the AA, you go
Sure.
through a bunch of different meetings, but the layers eventually you start to soften up, you start to open up.
Yep.
What are some of the transformations or aha moments you had throughout the AA experience?
Absolutely. I think after going to so many different meetings, I went to meetings over at Grand Valley State, and And obviously, there's a lot of college kids that are there, and they have no clue that they have a problem. They were living that larger than life mindset that I was coming from. But I met some of those leaders of that group, and to hear that they've had 13 years of sobriety, it's like, wow. And they're thriving. Maybe I need to listen more. So that's what I did. For 3 months, I remember going to these meetings. I would juggle between one at Grand Valley and one at a church. And the one at Grand Valley, like I said, was full of college kids and some older men with sobriety. And they had probably 50 plus years of sobriety between them. And then I found another group that was at a church, and it was LGBT focused. And that was super, super, super powerful. 1 second, I'm sorry. And the cool part about that was it was an LGBT group that I was able to find at the church. And that was a layer that I wasn't prepared for. I didn't really connect that I wasn't even ready to learn that I had a drinking problem. So after going for 3 months, I finally shared for the first time. And I remember it was a first step meeting, and I was just sharing how I got there. And I rushed through how I got there, and you don't tell them everything. And that first sharing, it's pretty pathetic actually, because there's so many layers to peel back, and I wasn't ready to let them know that I was drinking so I can escape, so that I could be my authentic self. I wasn't ready to share that I was out there partying and getting myself into a place or to a mindset that allowed me to let my inhibitions go. I wasn't sharing so many of the secret life that I had been hiding, that I didn't even know that I was hiding, really. But it took me 3 months of going to meetings and just literally saying, hi, my name is Carlos and I'm sentenced to be here, or hi, my name is Carlos and I'm learning about recovery. Not once would I say that I'm an alcoholic, though, because I just wasn't in that space.
The first time, it seems like the first time you share the story, you graze over it. But the more you share your story, the more layers that are peeled back, and you realize there was a reason why you were partying it up and living larger than life, because there was a lot of insecurity and, like you mentioned, identity issues that you really weren't totally comfortable with, or you didn't really own it all 100% of the way, or there was something where you felt like you couldn't be that and be your authentic self in normal life, and you had to escape in order to be it. So identity or identifying kind of the heart of the issue is one thing, but then healing has to start. And I know that you love, we're always still healing and growing and learning and all of that. But you have really healed quite a bit and transformed throughout these years. Tell me a little bit about first identifying what even, the deeper layers were, but then also the healing process.
Yeah. So, when I finally opened up to recovery and started identifying with other people who were similar, that was an important piece for me. But the deeper part was when I started allowing God in. If you're not familiar with 12 steps, it's very much about connecting with your higher power and God, and they flip between uses of different words for God. But at the end of the day, it is about connecting with something bigger than yourself, higher power. And that's when I knew that God was on this journey with me. And I thought, okay, AA, I can beat this. I can get this under control. I stopped drinking. It's not like, over my lifetime, I stopped drinking caffeine when I was 16. I don't do pork. I can give this up. No big deal. And I did. So I just said, no more drinking. And I thought I got this beat. And then you start going to these meetings and you start hearing other people's stories. And then eventually, if you're really in that space to let God work, then you start picking up the books and start reading, and you start working the steps. And so that first moment for me was just surrendering that I was powerless. I'm powerless over this, and let's figure out what is this about. So the more I got into AA, I started to peel back those layers and realizing, oh, alcohol has been a symptom of a larger issue. Alcohol has been my vice to escape or to live a different life. And things started to make more sense, and God started showing up more and more and holding my hand, saying, okay, let's take this next step. And some of those steps could be just unfolding, like, why have you lost 3 days of your life because you're indulged in this addictive behavior? So after several years, though, I think it was close to 3 years of being in AA and working through some of those and realizing what alcohol meant to me and in my life, I started coming to realizing, oh, wait, there's so many other recovery programs. There's so many other addictions out there. And I still couldn't accept that alcohol was a huge problem. Granted, I was able to not drink, and it made a world of difference. And I learned how to be social without being under the influence. I learned how to be fun and be that larger than life personality without drinking. I mean, I had to relearn so many different things and be okay with that. But the part that I didn't know that God was working was really getting to the deeper stuff. And that was with sex addiction. And that, that's why I was out that night. I was out that night when the day of the car accident happened, because I was living that second life, and I drank enough so that I could do it and be in a world that God was not wanting me to be in. And so that led me to really diving into recovery and first step, or to 12 steps.
And then you found groups focusing on that and started healing that area. Is that right?
Yeah. And again, that was through a lot of prayer and surrendering and just going through the first step, admitting that you're powerless and that your life is unmanageable. All the things that you learn in 12 steps that sound so cliche and so silly, or you just think to yourself, shut up, like, this is too much, and yet there's so much truth behind a lot of the steps. So I remember it was like going to my first meeting again. I thought, okay, once you go to your first meeting, you go, I never have to do this again, and it just gets easier and easier and easier going. And like I said, you learn to share and you connect and you meet people. And I remember getting to this new thing, and I was working with my sponsor in AA, and she said, I really think it's time to find the next thing. Like, what is the next thing? And as we were peeling back layers, and so I had to go and find a group for sex addicts, and that, they call that SAA. And it was horrible. It was worse than going to AA. It was worse than being sentenced to it, but it opened a world for me that I knew, okay, God, walk me through this, walk me through this. I'm holding out my hand. And I remember finding that first meeting, and a friend actually went with me. A friend drove me and sat through this meeting, and all I could think of in my head, and I just saw her for the first time in 8 years, a couple weeks ago. I said, why would you do that? Like, that's just crazy, And she said, because I knew you needed healing. I knew that you needed to figure the next thing out. And I sat through that meeting, and it was just like sitting through that first AA meeting. You're looking at the people. I don't identify with this person. Oh no, that person's just crazy. And you're all these things that you allow yourself to be distracted by. And at the end of the day, it's really about, why am I here? God, why are we here today? And what am I supposed to take away from this? And that started a whole new path for me of just digging deep and healing and uncovering things. And I'm still doing it.
So when you say healing, tell me a little bit about what that means. Does it mean acceptance? Does it mean feeling peaceful? Does it mean forgiveness, yourself and others? What does healing mean?
Do I think I think number one for me for the healing is just knowing that I belong. I think I shared earlier that growing up, all I wanted to feel was like that I belonged. I wanted to feel like I belonged in my neighborhood when I was nothing like the other kids. And again, thank God that I wasn't, because I didn't want to be in drugs and gangs and all that other stuff. But going to my family, I wanted to be like my brothers and my cousins. We have a large family, so just belonging and going into school and going to a Catholic school, knowing that I was always I knew I was different. I knew I wasn't like everybody else. So that healing needed to happen. And I think that's by drinking. I learned after going through recovery is that the alcohol for me was a symptom of the larger addiction. It was the vehicle that allowed me to belong. And so that had to happen. The sense of just healing and knowing that I belong and there is a place for me. And then I think the other piece was I didn't realize how important it was for me to have God in my life. Like that relationship had to heal. Going to a Catholic school and being picked on at a Catholic school is damaging, and then seeing my siblings and friends getting married and having kids and having, church be a part of their life in these different communities. So my relationship with God had to heal. And I still wasn't, even though we were walking together, I wasn't willing to have those conversations with him. I wasn't willing to partner with him fully. And it wasn't until recovery and then getting into SAA that became more important. Like I knew that relationship had to be rebuilt. So that was another area of healing. And I think the last big area of healing for me is just forgiving myself. When you go through 14 years of recovery, you realize so many of the things that you did, whether that to yourself or to other people, and whether those people even know or that you've done to yourself. Like it's deep, and it's a journey.
Yeah, that is one of the steps, isn't it? To forgive yourself, but then also to ask for forgiveness, because I know throughout, and with the addiction, there's times when you've felt guilt or shame or done things that you regret later and things like that. So tell me a little bit about who you had to forgive, or did you have to go to anybody and say, I'm sorry? And who did you choose, and what did that look like?
Wow. All of the above. I think there's no linear process. I think you learn that even though it's laid out as a 12-step thing, it's not linear. So I think that the first forgiveness I had to start with was, I think I had to learn to forgive the people that I was carrying hurt from, like the people I was hurt by, whether it was a past relationship, and having those conversations. I can remember one of them. I remember the one guy that I dated, and this was early on. It was like my senior year of high school, and I didn't realize how damaging that was. But years later, and after recovery, and to learn that he was in recovery later, I remember spending time with him. It was probably 12 years, like it had been 12 years. And for me to share with him what I experienced while we were dating, and how I had to forgive and work through those things, not even knowing if I'd ever see him again or talk to him again. It just happened that it aligned. But then to hear him say he didn't remember any of it, he didn't remember any of the hurt and the pain. And it was very serious and real, which is why he's in recovery. But in that moment, I thought, wow, he didn't even know. But hearing it, and for him to have that grace. So, there's that. And then there's countless, family and friends that your list just gets bigger and bigger. And I'm still working through my list. I just had one of those experiences about a month ago of somebody who I hurt deeply in college, that we finally had that moment where I could say I'm sorry, and she was in a space to receive it. And it wasn't that I hadn't tried before, but I hurt her in a way that it was totally because of my addiction. I remember vividly hurting her, telling her that I don't really ever need to see you again and be your friend anymore. And she had done nothing wrong. She was an amazing friend, and she was loving and caring, and she dealt with me when I showed up at her door in those state of minds of drinking. Like, she saw all of that. And recovery helped me realize, like, wow, I wasn't in a space to be loved, and she was one of those people who was willing to. And to have to come back and apologize for that was a powerful moment. And there's lots of those stories. I remember having to come back to my sister. I remember driving cross country with her in the height of all the addiction. And we were staying in Las Vegas, and she was probably 16 at the time. And I'm thinking, oh, she's fine and she's sleeping. And I left her at the hotel room to go and do what I do with addiction and to meet some stranger, and granted, in this, and I had drank before that, get myself into that mindset that I'm a whole different person, and left her there thinking she's fine, and not knowing not knowing what I know now, that, gosh, what a scary situation to be left in as a 16-year-old, because she couldn't find me and I wasn't answering my phone, and she's walking around this hotel where anything could have happened to her in Vegas, right? And having that conversation is not enjoyable, but it is very freeing, because it's the only way healing happens, and they can choose not to forgive you, that's something I had to accept, because there's people who have chosen not to forgive me, and it's extremely hard to live with.
Forgiveness is such I want to say heavy topic, but yet when you go through that process and you make amends and you can forgive yourself, there's so much on the other side that allows you to live your life with more emotional freedom.
Absolutely.
Now, you've said a few times that God kept showing up. God kept showing up. He kept leading you to the next best step, or leading you along the way. What are some times when you felt God show up and you were like, okay, I'm either doing what I'm supposed to do, I'm taking the right next step, my relationship with him is growing, and I'm seeing him more and more in my everyday life?
Absolutely. If I think back, so the accident happened in 2004. So this is 14 years later. God shows up for me every day, in the sense that you think that you can just stop recovery. I mean, there's part of you when you're in recovery that you just want to, at least for me, like, when am I done? When am I done? And you get comfortable. You get comfortable when you have years of sobriety under you, that there's those moments where you're like, oh, I can do this again. And you go and try to do that again, whatever that activity was that led you to that path. And you realize, yeah, God's here putting all those things right in front of me again. Like, you can't do that again. You can't go out and party like you used to. You can't go out to this club that you used to go to. You can't hang out with certain people that you used to, because it's still there. So God shows me up daily to put that tape in for me, because again, it's so easy for me to want to be in charge. It's so easy for me to want to feel like, oh, I can manage my life. It's gone, and it's not. It's there. I can still fall into those dark spaces. But I think even more powerful for me is having that addictive personality. It's so easy for me to get distracted. It's so easy for me to let life, those moments of life that are full of anxiety or whatever it is that triggers me to get into that space. God shows up for me knowing that I don't have to go down that road again. God shows up and gives me the courage or the strength or the ability to be honest, or the ability to say, hey, Denise, I want to do this interview, because it's part of my healing. It's part of my recovery. And I think I told you before we started this, I'm like scared to death to do this. But in my heart this morning, I remember thinking, I don't want to do this interview. I think I could just cancel. I don't think that I'm ready to do this. But God showed up this morning. He showed up and said, you know what, just leave it to me to carry you through this. So those are some of the tangibles with recovery. But I think that God also has shown up in all those other areas that I talked about with healing. Like, I know I belong, I went through that quest of trying to find the right church family. I hopped around so many times, and I landed in this place of knowing that, wait, God, this is between you and I. Like, this is a relationship for you and I to be in. And I don't need to seek the validation from a church community or from a pastor or from friends or family. Like, this is a personal relationship. And that has been extremely powerful and liberating. And it's also very challenging because sometimes we don't agree, and that's been kind of a love.
You and God don't agree?
Yeah, absolutely not.
You're like, wait a minute, that's not what I want to do.
Totally.
Even this interview, he's pulling your heartstrings to do it, and yet the mind says, wait a minute, this is a bit scary.
Absolutely. And then he just sends those messages of like, yeah, you said you don't want to be in the driver's seat anymore. So those are some of the ways. And then I think the biggest way he shows up for me, if you want to look in the real world, is just the amount of people he puts in my path that are so accepting and so loving and let me know that it's okay to be my authentic self and to be doing, just that belonging that I was talking about. And that's really powerful. I mean, knowing where I came from and the things that I've done and the fact that people are still there is powerful.
I love that. I think at the end of the day, as humans, we all want to mean something to someone and be loved and then provide value back into that community. And I feel like you do such an amazing job of creating community yourself. Carlos is always the first one to show up and help and get people together. And I mean, there's a reason why you have found a place to belong. And part of it is because God has led you to those people and you've taken action there. You've showed up and been the person that people want to be around. And you make everybody feel like they're welcome. And you are one of those people that sees the wallflower person and goes and is their friend. And everybody feels that larger than life attitude from you in such a pure, fun, accepting, like heart open type of way. And to know the hurt that you've been through, to know the healing that you've experienced. I didn't know the story prior to our coffee date, and I would never have guessed it. So, Carlos, I just want to I know we've got a few more questions, but I just want to acknowledge you for taking those steps and for being open eventually to working through the layers of hurt that you've experienced. Because of the healing that you've done, you are now an open person. And because you are, your heart is open, meaning that your eyes are up and you just kind of radiate this love, and you make so many other people feel like they belong. So I want to say thank you to you. Whew, now I'm getting emotional because you are providing that space for others to do their own healing as well, whether you know it or whether they know it or not, because of the belongingness that you create. So thank you for that.
Well, you're welcome. And I just want to say thank you for that reminder, because, I take it for granted that I've been in recovery, and I just assume that people know, and I forget. It's so easy to forget that it's easy to hide, and when you start hiding, that's when you're walking that dangerous space. And so thank you for the opportunity to share.
So why now? Why, after 14 years of going through your life? I mean, you now are married, you have solid relationships, you've got solid community, you are taking steps to, you've done so much work inwardly and outwardly. Why now are you ready to share your story?
I don't have a concrete answer for that. I know that it's just something that has been on my heart. It's something that I've been resisting. It's something that I struggle with. And just over the last few years and working with you in so many capacities, living outside of that comfort zone and knowing what happens when you live out of that comfort zone, I feel that it's important. But I think if I'm truly raw and honest about it too, I think it's part of my next step. It's part of my next step of owning the addiction, and because it's a daily struggle. I know I've probably shared with you that, I lose days where it's like I want to be in this alternate world, whether it's like in a chat room or just going to certain events, whatever it is that triggers it. But I'm in this space. I've been in this space for a while where I think I need to share my story because of the things that you just shared. I am married, and we share so much of our lives through social media these days. And we've become like Peter and I, that's my husband. We've claimed happy hubbies and this hashtag, and then you walk into a room and people know who you are and what you're doing. And so now I think God is showing up in this way that I've been resisting for so long, that he is telling me, okay, you need to be more accountable. Like, I've given you these gifts. We've been walking together, but you're not challenging yourself, and you're not sharing it and providing that hope and that love for the people that might need it. And I think very specifically, I see it in the LGBT community still. It's still very real. Like, I know that for me, that was, I leaned on drinking. I've leaned on sex to figure out who I am or to avoid who I am even. And I see that happening still. And especially when you get messages from random people saying, thank you and Peter for just being yourselves, because we didn't know it was possible to be in a same-sex relationship and be healthy, because it's not what's happening, and it still isn't happening. And I see so many young people or people my age or people older that are stuck, and it's heartbreaking. It's heartbreaking that they don't know God. It is heartbreaking that they don't know themselves. It's heartbreaking that they don't know that there is a space for them and a place for them to belong. And I'm just hoping that by sharing that, I can build that muscle to keep moving forward in my own recovery, because I felt a little stuck for a while.
Well, you not only have a story of healing, you have a story of hope. That anybody who is feeling lost, who is feeling like they don't belong and they don't really know what to do or where to go, that there is hope, and that there is a God who loves them and has been there even in the midst of darkness, has been there probably pulling on their heartstrings right now. And you are an example of somebody who listened, who said, okay, I'm open, I'm listening, I accept, I love, and I choose to give back in that way to others.
Yeah. And, you just reminded me, I'm sharing with you that it's about those that are feeling the way I feel, or that have gone through similar, experiences. But I'm also forgetting the complete other audience of people who don't know like what we're going through. I remember one of our dear friends. I remember sitting in a car. Let me go back. I just remember meeting this person, feeling like we're never going to be friends. There's no way that the two of us are going to be friends. I could just feel that energy that I don't have a place in her world because I'm gay. And right away that triggers all of those past hurts and feelings from me. But then, because of this walk I've had with God, because of recovery, because of all of these healings and forgiveness, I'm like, well, I can make a space for her, and fast forwarding, I was completely right. Like that person did not have that space, but I kept showing up, and God kept showing up, and I knew that she's a person of God. And I said, there is a God, then God is going to bring us together. Right. And I will not forget, I'm going to get teared up, but I remember sitting not too long ago in the car with this person, just asking, where do I fall into your world and with being gay and identity and my marriage and all this other stuff. And it was God showed up in that moment because I knew it was uncomfortable. I knew it's something that had been weighing on both of us in different ways, even though we have created this friendship that is just so deep and so rich and giving and taking. And I remember her saying, I don't necessarily have the answer. And she said to me very uncomfortably, I don't think that you're supposed to be married to the same sex still, but all I do know is I meant to love you and to love Peter. And that was okay, and I think that is the other reason that I'm supposed to be sharing my story, because there are so many people out there in the world who need to know that it's okay. Like, we don't have to have the answers. Let God have that answer, that He brought us together for a reason, and be open to that. And I just thought you just reminded me of that, and I wanted to share that.
Absolutely. That's beautiful. Well, before we close out tonight or today, is there anything else that you want to mention or stirring within your heart?
I think for me, I just want to share with your listeners that the hardest relationship that you're going to have in this world is with yourself, I think, because there's so many distractions. And in that relationship, and if you want it to work, you have to partner with God. And that's for higher power, however you want to identify. It just can't be just of you. And I think that people need to know that we are created to be so much more, and you can only do that if you're willing to be authentic. And it's work, and it's work every single day. And there's new challenges, and there's just so many obstacles. But I think that if you can lead from the heart, and if you just choose to make your choices out of love, you're going to win.
Mic drop. Thank you again, Carlos, for sharing your story so vulnerably and authentically. I know that there's a lot of people who will be touched and want to continue getting to know you. So check Carlos out at Facebook. All of his links will be in the show notes and description box below. And let him know how his story impacted and touched you today. Thank you so much for listening today. Head over to denisewalsh.com. Enter your email to subscribe to our list, and I will be sending out an early bird special coupon. 50% off, in fact, of the Dream Life Workbook when it is launched in just a few months. So if you want to have first dibs, let's get your name on that list. Thanks again. I so appreciate you. And remember to dream big.